Life was pretty tough back in the Middle Ages. Most people lived in small villages. Cities were crowded, often dirty places. Sickness was just part of daily life. It was everywhere. People got sick often. They died young. It was a fact of life, a harsh one. Think about it. There was no real understanding of germs. People didn't know tiny things made them sick. They didn't wash their hands much. Water wasn't always clean. Food wasn't always safe to eat. And sanitation, as we know it, didn't exist. Waste often just went into the streets or into rivers people drank from. These things made sickness spread fast. Childbirth was really dangerous. Many women died having babies. Many babies didn't make it past their first year. Its children were always getting sick. Diseases like dysentery, smallpox, and the plague hit hard. They could wipe out whole families, whole villages. A simple cut could get infected. An infected cut could kill you. There were no antibiotics. There was no modern medicine. When someone got sick, it was a big deal. Fear was a constant companion. People didn't know what caused illness. It seemed to come out of nowhere. One day you were fine, the next you had a fever. Or chills. Or a painful swelling. It was a mystery. This mystery often led people to look for answers beyond the physical. They often thought sickness came from God. Maybe it was a punishment for sins, maybe it was a test of faith. Or maybe it was the work of evil spirits, of demons, the devil. This was a common belief. It shaped how people thought about health and healing. Doctors, the kind we think of today, were very rare. They were mostly in big cities. They were educated, yes, but their knowledge was limited. They believed in things like humors. That meant the body had four main fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If these were out of balance, you got sick. Their treatments often involved bleeding people, or making them throw up, or using strong laxatives. These treatments could be dangerous. They could make people weaker, and they cost a lot of money. Most common folk could never afford a doctor. So, for most people, help came from closer to home. It came from the community, from family, from neighbors, from people who had local knowledge. People had to rely on each other. This was a social need, a deep human need to help the suffering. When someone in the village fell ill, people didn't just stand by. They tried to do something, anything. They brought food, they offered comfort, they shared what they knew about remedies. This shared knowledge was vital. It was passed down through generations, from mother to daughter, from elder to youth. It was a collection of observations, of traditions, of beliefs. It wasn't written down in books for most people. It was in their heads, in their hands. In their practices, this was the backdrop for medieval folk remedies. They weren't just random acts. They grew out of a harsh reality, a world where life was short and illness was common. A world without modern science. A world where people needed answers. They needed hope. They needed ways to cope with disease, and they needed someone to turn to. That's what these remedies tried to provide. They were a way for people to feel like they had some control, some power against the unknown. They offered comfort, they offered a chance, however small, to feel better. When people got sick, they often looked to the earth for help. Plants were everywhere. They were the most common tools for healing. This was the practical side of medieval remedies. People observed what grew around them, they learned what worked, or what seemed to work. This knowledge was precious. It was gathered over hundreds of years. Think about a simple garden, or a field, or a forest. It was a living pharmacy. People collected herbs. They picked leaves, flowers, roots, and bark. They dried them. They stored them. They knew what each plant was for, or what it was believed to be for. How did they learn this? A lot of it was trial and error. Someone might try a plant for a cough. If it helped, they remembered it. They told others. They watched animals too. Animals often knew which plants to eat when they were sick. And people paid attention to these things, and they had traditions. Old wives' tales, we might call them now. But back then, these were important facts. They were knowledge, passed from one generation to the next. Mothers taught daughters. Healers taught apprentices. This was how the wisdom survived. Many common herbs were used, things you might even recognize today. Chamomile, for example. People used it for calming nerves, for sleep, for stomach aches. Mint was good for digestion, for fresh breath. Plantain leaves were put on wounds. They were thought to stop bleeding, to help cuts heal. Comfrey was called nip bone. People used it for broken bones. For sprains, they made poultices. A poultice is a soft, moist mass. You put it on the skin. It was believed to draw out bad humors or to soothe pain. They didn't just use plants whole. They prepared them. They made teas. Boiling herbs in water released their goodness. They made salves, mixing herbs with animal fat or beeswax. This made a soothing ointment. They crushed herbs into powders. They mixed them with wine or ale. The alcohol helped draw out the plant's properties. And it helped preserve them. The seasons were important too. Some plants were only available at certain times of the year. People had to know when to gather them, when to store them, how to dry them properly. And if they didn't, the plants might lose their power, or they might spoil. This took skill. It took careful planning. Local knowledge was key. What grew in one village might not grow in another. So different regions had different remedies. People relied on what was readily available. They knew their local landscape. They knew its secrets. Some plants were seen as having special powers. He's not just medicinal ones, but magical ones too. Mandrake root, for instance, looked a bit like a human. It was thought to have strong magical properties. It was used in charms. It was used for pain relief, but also for protection. Foxglove was a strong medicine. Too much could be deadly, but small amounts were used for heart problems. It was a plant of both healing and danger. The effectiveness of these herbal remedies varied. Some truly did work. We know today that many plants have active chemical compounds that can ease pain, reduce inflammation, fight infection, or help you sleep. But people didn't know about these compounds then. They just knew that if they used a certain herb, they felt better. Or the fever went down, or the wounds started to heal. But some remedies didn't work at all, or they were even harmful. The knowledge wasn't perfect. It was based on observation. Not on belief and on hope, but in a world without modern drugs, plants were the best shot they had. They were a connection to nature, a practical, observable way to fight sickness. And they formed the backbone of many folk remedies. Herbs were important, yes, but medieval folk remedies were about more than just plants. A lot of it came down to belief, to faith, to rituals. This is where the mysterious side of healing really comes into play. People lived in a world filled with visible things and invisible forces. These forces were thought to influence everything, including health and sickness. Sickness wasn't always seen as just a physical problem. It could be a spiritual one, or a magical one. If you were sick, maybe you had upset God, or angered a spirit, or maybe you were cursed. So, healing needed to address these invisible causes too. Charms were very common. These were not just pretty objects, they were thought to hold power. People wore them. They hung them in their homes. A charm might be a small bag of herbs, or a piece of parchment with words written on it, or a specific stone. The belief was that the charm would protect them, or draw out sickness. Incantations were used too. These were spoken words, prayers, chants. Sometimes they were religious words, asking saints for help, calling on God. Sometimes they were older words, more like spells. People believed that words had power, that speaking certain phrases could influence reality. It could drive away evil. It could invite healing. The church played a huge role here. Sickness was often seen through a religious lens. Going to church was important. Praying was important. Pilgrimages to holy sites were very popular. People would travel far to visit places where saints were buried, or where miracles had happened. They hoped for a divine cure. They touched holy relics, a piece of a saint's bone, a fragment of their clothing. These objects were thought to carry immense healing power. It was all about faith, about belief in something greater than themselves. Holy water was another common remedy. Priests would bless water. People would drink it, or wash with it, or sprinkle it on their sick loved ones. It was thought to cleanse the body and soul, to drive away evil, to bring healing. Then there was sympathetic magic. This was a belief that like cures like, or that things that looked alike were connected. For example, if someone had jaundice, their skin turned yellow, so healers might give them yellow herbs, like turmeric or celandine. The idea was that the yellow herb would draw out the yellow sickness, or that eating a heart-shaped leaf might help with heart problems, or red foods for blood ailments. It sounds strange to us now, but it made sense to people then. It was a way to understand the mysterious connection between things. The power of suggestion was strong. If a sick person truly believed a charm or a prayer would work, sometimes they felt better. This wasn't because of the charm itself, but because their mind played a part. Hope is a powerful thing. When you have hope, your body might respond differently. We call this the placebo effect now. But back then, it was just seen as the charm or prayer working, as proof of its power. The local wise woman or cunning man also relied on this belief. They might use herbs, but they also used rituals. They might tell fortunes or cast out curses. Their authority came from their knowledge, but also from their perceived connection to the mysterious, to the spirit world. People trusted them. They believed in their abilities. This trust was a big part of the healing process. So, for medieval people, healing wasn't just about what you put in your body, it was about what you believed, what you prayed, what rituals you followed. It was a mix of the physical and the spiritual, the visible and the invisible. And this blend offered comfort, it offered hope, it offered a framework for understanding and battling sickness in a world full of unknowns. So, who were these people providing remedies? Most villages didn't have a doctor, not a university trained one anyway. Help came from a variety of people. Each had their own skills, their own role, their own place in the community. The most common healer was often the wise woman or cunning man. These were not official titles. They were simply people in the village who had a lot of knowledge. They knew about herbs, they knew about traditions, they often helped with childbirth. They set simple fractures, they advised on diet, they offered comfort. Their knowledge was usually passed down, from mother to daughter or through apprenticeship. They often lived on the edge of the village. Respected, sometimes feared, always needed. These wise women were often the first stop for someone feeling ill. They knew the local plants, they knew how to prepare them, they knew old remedies for common complaints. They were often seen as having a deeper connection to nature, and sometimes to the mystical. People went to them for physical ailments, but also for emotional troubles, or for help with curses, or for finding lost things. Their role was broad. It mixed medicine, magic, and social support. Then there was a midwife. Sometimes she was the same person as the wise woman, but her special skill was helping women with pregnancy and childbirth. This was a dangerous time for women. The midwife knew how to assist with deliveries, how to care for newborns. She also knew many remedies specific to women's health, for morning sickness, for pain during labor. She was a crucial figure in any community. The local priest also had a role. Sickness, as we talked about, was often linked to sin or divine will. The priest offered spiritual healing, prayers, blessings, absolution, exorcisms if evil spirits were thought to be involved. He might use holy water or relics. His comfort was mostly spiritual, but people believed it could have a very real effect on the body. He often acted as a counselor, as a source of hope. For more hands-on treatments, there was the barber surgeon. This person wasn't a doctor, not in the educated sense, but they had practical skills. They cut hair, yes, but they also pulled teeth, they lanced boils, they set broken bones. They did bloodletting. Bloodletting was a very common practice. People believed it would balance the humors. It often did more harm than good, but it was a widely accepted treatment. Barber surgeons usually learned their trade through apprenticeship. They were skilled with tools. Their work was often messy and painful, but sometimes they saved lives. Monasteries also played a part. Monks and nuns often grew their own herbs. They had some medical texts. They cared for the sick in their communities. They were known for their knowledge of plants and for their care of the poor and infirm. They often combined herbal remedies with prayer and spiritual guidance. Sometimes traveling healers would come through a village. They might claim to have special cures or magical elixirs. Some were genuine, others were con artists. People were often desperate. They would try anything. These traveling healers were a mix of hope and risk, so healing wasn't a single profession. It was a network, a patchwork of knowledge and skills. It was deeply woven into the social fabric of the village. People knew who to go to for what. The wise woman for herbs, the priest for prayers, the barber for a wound. Each person had a job to do, and the community relied on all of them. These healers didn't have formal training like doctors today, but they had experience. They had tradition, and most importantly, they had the trust and belief of the people they served. This made them vital. It's easy for us today to separate medicine from magic. We think of science, of evidence. But in medieval times, this line was blurry. Sometimes it didn't exist at all. Everything was connected. The natural world, the spiritual world, it was all part of one big system. If an herb helped someone feel better, it wasn't just medicine. It was a gift from God, or from nature itself, or maybe a blessing from a spirit. The reason why it worked was often a mystery. But the effect was real, and that was what mattered. People didn't need to understand the chemical compounds. They just needed to see results. And if a charm or an incantation seemed to work, that was also real. That was magic, but was it bad magic or good magic? Often, it was seen as just another way to influence the world. Another tool for healing. If it brought comfort, if it eased pain, if it brought hope, then it was good. People didn't always care about the label, they cared about the outcome. This blend of practical remedy and spiritual belief was natural for them. Their world was full of wonders and fears, gods, saints, angels, but also demons, witches, and curses. Sickness could be a physical problem, or it could be a spiritual attack, or a punishment. So healing needed to address all these possibilities. The community was at the heart of all this. These remedies weren't just for individuals, they were a social glue. When someone was sick, the whole village rallied. His neighbors brought food, they offered prayers, they shared their remedies. This was an important part of survival. It built strong bonds. It showed care. It reinforced the shared understanding of the world. The wise woman, the priest, the barber surgeon, they all operated within this shared understanding. Their authority came from that shared belief. People trusted them because they were part of the community. They understood the local traditions, the local fears, the local hopes. Did these remedies always work? No. Many people died despite every effort. Life was hard, and often short. But these remedies offered something crucial. They offered hope. They offered action. In a world where people often felt powerless against disease, doing something, anything, was important. It gave them a sense of control. It gave them comfort. Imagine a mother with a sick child. There's no doctor, no hospital, she knows a few herbs, she says a prayer, she tries a charm. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But she did something. She didn't just sit by. This act of trying was important. It was a way to fight back, and some of these folk remedies genuinely had merit. We know now that willow bark contains salicylic acid, a pain reliever. Foxglove has compounds that affect the heart. Many herbs have anti-inflammatory or antiseptic properties. Medieval people didn't know the science, but they knew what helped. They were observing, experimenting, and passing on knowledge that had real effects. So, medieval folk remedies were based on a complex mix. They drew from practical observation of nature, from deeply held spiritual and religious beliefs, and from the powerful bonds of community. They weren't just simple cures, they were a reflection of how people understood their world. A world where health and illness were woven into the fabric of daily life. A world where mystery and belief were as real as the plants in the garden. And above all, they were a testament to the enduring human need to alleviate suffering, to offer hope, and to care for one another.